The Book of Good Counsels, from the Sanskrit of the Hithopadesha, by Sir Edwin Arnold. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Jyoti Taravanat. War. When the next day of instruction had come, the king's sons spake to the sage Vishnu Sarman. "Master," said they, "we are princes, and the sons of princes, and we earnestly desire. Hear now therefore of war, whose opening is thus. Between the peoples of Peacock and Swan war raged, and evenly the contest ran, until the swans to trust the crows began." "And how was all that?" asked the sons of the Raja. Vishnu Sarman proceeded to relate the battle of the swans and peacocks. In the Isle of Camphor there is a lake called Lotus Water, and therein a swan royal named Silver Sides had his residence. The birds of the marsh and the mere had elected him king, in full council of all the fowls, for a people with no ruler is like a ship that is without a helmsman. One day King Silver Sides with his courtiers was quietly reposing on a couch of well spread lotus blossoms, when a crane named Long Bill, who had just arrived from foreign parts, entered the presence with an obeisance and sat down. "What news from abroad, Long Bill?" asked his Majesty. "Great news, may it please you," answered the crane, "and therefore have I hastened hither. Will your Majesty hear me?" "Speak," said King Silver Sides. "You must know, my liege," began the crane, "that over all the birds of the Vindhya mountains in Jambudvipa a peacock is king, and his name is Jewel Plume. I was looking for food about a certain burnt jungle there, when some of his retainers discovered me, and asked my name and country. I am a vassal of King Silver Sides, Lord of the Island of Camphor," I replied, "and I am travelling in foreign lands for my pleasure." Upon that the birds asked me which country, my own or theirs, and which king appeared to me superior. "How can you ask?" I replied. "The Island of Camphor is, as it were, heaven itself, and its king a heaven born ruler. The dwellers in a barren land like yours, how can I describe them? Come for yourselves and see the country where I live." Thereupon, your Majesty, the birds were exceedingly offended, as one might expect. Simple milk, when serpents drink it, straightway into venom turns, and a fool who heareth counsel all the wisdom of it spurns. For indeed no reflecting person wastes time in admonishing blockheads. The birds that took the apes to teaching lost eggs and nests in pay for preaching. "How did that befall?" asked the king. The crane related the story of the weaver birds and the monkeys. In a nullah that leads down the Nerbudda river, there stood a large silk cotton tree, where a colony of weaver birds had built their hanging nests, and lived snugly in them whatever the weather. It was in the rain like indigo sheets, and a tremendous storm of water was falling. The birds looked out from their nests and saw some monkeys, shivering and starved with the cold, standing under the tree. Twit, twit, you monkeys," they began to chirrup. "Listen to us. With beaks we built these nests of fibers scattered. You that have hands and feet, build or be spattered." On hearing that, the monkeys were by no means pleased. "Ho, ho!" said they, "the birds in their snug nests are jeering at us. Wait till the rain is over." Accordingly, so soon as the weather mended, the monkeys climbed into the tree, and broke all the birds' eggs, and demolished every nest. "I ought to have known better," concluded the Crane, "than to have wasted my suggestions on King Jewel Plume's creatures." "But what did they say?" asked Silver Sides. "They said, Raja," answered the Crane, "who made that Swan of thine a king." "And what was your reply?" asked Silver Sides. "I demanded," replied the Crane, "who made a king of that peacock of theirs." Thereupon they were ready to kill me for rage, but I displayed my very best valour. Is it not written, "A modest manner fits a maid, and patience is a man's adorning. But brides may kiss, nor do amiss, and men may draw at scathe and scorning." "Yet a man should measure his own strength first," said the Rajah, smiling. "How did you fare against King Jewel Plume's fellows?" "Very scurvily," replied Long Bill. "Thou rascal Crane," they cried, "dost thou feed on his soil and revile our Sovereign? That is past bearing." And thereat they all pecked at me. Then they began again, "Thou thick-skulled Crane, that king of thine is a goose, a web-footed lord of littleness, and thou art but a frog in a well to bid us serve him. Him, forsooth! Serving narrow-minded masters dwarfs high natures to their size. Seen before a convex mirror, elephants do show as mice. Bad kings are only strong enough to spoil good vassals. It, don't you? Mighty may prove things insignificant. A tale of moonshine turned an elephant." "No, how was that?" I asked. The birds related the story of the old hare and the elephants. Once on a time, very little rain had fallen the due season, and the elephants, being oppressed with thirst, thus accosted their leader: "Master, how are we to live? The small creatures find something to wash in, but we cannot, and we are half dead in consequence. Whither shall we go then, and what shall we do?" Upon that the King of the Elephants led them away a little space, and showed them a beautiful pool of crystal water, where they took their ease. Now it chanced that a company of hares resided on the banks of the pool, and the going and coming of the elephants trampled many of them to death, till one of their number, named Hard Head, grumbled out, "This troop will be coming here to water every day, and every one of our family will be crushed." "Do not disquiet yourself," said an old buck named Good Speed, "I will contrive to avert it." And so saying, he set off, bethinking himself on his way how he should approach and accost a herd of elephants. For elephants destroy by touching, snakes with point of tooth beguile, kings by favour kill, and traitors murder with a fatal smile. "I will get on the top of a hill," he thought, "and address the elephants thence." This being done, and the lord of the herd perceiving him, it was asked of the Hare, " Who art thou, and whence comest thou ?"" I am an ambassador from his godship the Moon," replied Good Speed. " State your business," said the Elephant King. " Sire," began the Hare, " an ambassador speaks the truth safely by charter of his name. Thus saith the Moon, then — These hares were the guardians of my pool, and thine elephants in coming thither have scared them away. This is not well. Am I not Sasanka, whose banner bears a hare, and are not these hares my votaries ?"" Please your worship," said the Elephant King with much trepidation, " we knew nothing of this. We will go there no more." " It were well," said the sham ambassador, " that you first made your apologies to the Divinity, who is quaking with rage in his pool, and then went about your business." " We will do so," replied the Elephant with meekness ; and being led by night to the pool, in the ripples of which the image of the Moon was quivering, the herd made their prostrations, the Hare explaining to the Moon that their fault was done in ignorance, and thereupon they got their dismissal. " Nay," I said, " my Sovereign is no fiction, but a great King, and a noble, and one that might govern the three worlds, much more a kingdom. Thou shalt talk thy treason in the presence," they cried, and therewith I was dragged before King Jewel plume. " Who is this ?" asked the Rajah. " He is a servant of King Silver sides, of the island of Camphor," they replied, " and he slights your Majesty on your Majesty's own land." " Sirrah Crane," said the Prime Minister, a Vulture, " who is chief officer in that court ?"" A Brahmany goose," I answered, " named Know all, and he does know every possible science." " Sire," broke in a Parrot, " this Camphor isle and the rest are poor places, and belong to Jambu dwipa. Your Majesty has but to plant the royal foot upon them." " Oh, of course," said the King. " Nay," said I, " if talking makes your Majesty King of Camphor island, my liege may be Lord of Jumbu dwipa by a better title." " And that," said the Parrot, " is fighting," I responded. " Good," said the King with a smile ;" bid your people prepare for war." " Not so," I replied, " but send your own ambassador." " Who will bear the message ?" asked the Rajah. " He should be loyal, dexterous, and bold." " And virtuous," said the Vulture, " and therefore a Brahman. Better virtue marked a herald than that noble blood should deck. Shiva reigns for ever, Shiva while the sea wave stains his neck." " Then let the Parrot be appointed," said the Rajah. " I am your Majesty's humble servant," replied the Parrot, " but this Crane is a bad character, and with the bad I never like to travel. The 10-headed Ravana carried off the wife of Ramachandra. It does not do. With evil people neither stay nor go. The Heron died for being with the Crow." " How did that befall ?" asked the King. The Parrot related. The story of the Heron and the Crow. The high road to Ugin is a very unshaded and sultry one, but there stands upon it one large peepul tree, and therein a Crow and a Heron had their residence together. It was in the hot weather. that a tired traveller passed that way, and for the sake of the shade he laid his bow and arrows down, and dropped asleep under the tree. Before long the shadow of the tree shifted, and left his face exposed to the glare, which the Heron, perceiving, like the kindly bird he was, perched on the peepul tree and spread his wings out, so as to cast a shadow on the traveller's face. There the poor fellow, weary with his travel, continued to sleep soundly, and snored away comfortably with open mouth. The sight of his enjoyment was too much for the malevolent Crow, who, perching over him, dropped an unwelcome morsel into the sleeper's mouth, and straightway flew off. The traveller, starting from his slumber, looked about, and seeing no bird but the Heron, he fitted an arrow and shot him dead. "No," concluded the Parrot, "I liked it." "Very fine," replied the Parrot, "but kindly courtesies that issue from a smiling villain's mouth serve to startle, like a flower blossoming in time of drought. Needs must that thou art a bad man, for by thy talk war will have arisen, which a little conciliation had averted. Conciliation, weapon of the wise, wheedled therewith by woman's quick device. The wheelwright let his ears betray his eyes." "How came that about?" asked the King. The Parrot related the story of the appeased wheelwright. There was a wheelwright in Sringa whose name was Heavy Head. He had good reason to suspect the infidelity of his wife, but he had no absolute proof of it. One day he gave out that he should go to a neighbouring town, and he started accordingly. But he went a very little way, and then returning, hid himself in his wife's chamber. She, being quite satisfied that he was really gone away, invited her gallant to pass the evening with her, and began to spend it with him in unrestrained freedom. Presently, by chance, she detected the presence of her husband, and her manner instantly changed. "Life on my soul, what ails you?" said her lover. "You are quite dull to night." "I am dull," she replied, "because the lord of my life is gone. Without my husband the town is a wilderness. Who knows what may befall him, and whether he will have a nice supper?" "Trouble thyself no more about the quarrelsome dullard," said her gallant. "Dullard, quotha!" exclaimed the wife. "What matter what he is, since he is my all? Knowest thou not? Of the wife the lord is jewel, though no gems upon her beam. Lacking him she lacks adornment, howsoever her jewels gleam. Thou and the like of thee may serve a whim, as we chew a betel leaf, and trifle with a flower, but my husband is my master, and can do with me as he will. My life is wrapped up in him, and when he dies, alas, I will certainly die too. Is it not plainly said, 'Hares 3 crore and a half a crore hairs, on a man so many grow, and so many years to Swaga shall the true wife surely go.' And better still is promised, as herein, when the faithful wife, embracing tenderly a husband dead, mounts the blazing pile beside him, as it were the bridal bed. Though his sons were 20,000, 20,000 times over told, she shall bring his soul to splendour, and her love so large and bold. All this the wheelwright heard. What a lucky fellow I am, he thought, to have a wife so virtuous, and rushing from his place of concealment, he exclaimed in ecstasy to his wife gallant, "Sir, saw you ever truer wife than mine?" When the story was concluded, said Long bill, the King, with a gracious gift of food, sent me off before the Parrot, but he is coming after me, and it is now for your Majesty to determine as it shall please you." "My liege," observed the Brahmany goose with a sneer, "the Crane has done the King's business in foreign parts to the best of his power, which is that of a fool." "Let the past pass," replied the King, "and take thought for the present." "Be it in secret, then, your Majesty," said the Brahmany goose. "Counsel and to 6 years spoken unto all is notified. When a king holds consultation, let it be with one beside." Thereupon all withdrew, but the Rajah and the Minister. "What think you?" said Silver sides. "That the Crane has been employed to bring this about," replied the other. "What shall we do?" asked the King. "Dispatch 2 spies, the first to inform and send back the other, and make us know the enemy's strength or weakness. They must be such as can travel by land and water, so the Crane will serve for one, and we will keep his family in pledge at the King's gate. The other must be a very reserved character, as it is said, 'Sick men are for skillful leeches, prodigals for poisoning, fools for teachers, and the man who keeps a secret for a king.'" "I know such a one," said his Majesty after a pause. "It is half the victory," responded the Minister. At this juncture a chamberlain entered with a profound obeisance, and announced the arrival from Jambudvipa of the Parrot. "Let him be shown to a reception room," commanded the Goose. In reply to a look from the King, "He shall presently have audience." "War is pronounced then," said the King, as the attendant withdrew. "It is offered, my liege, but must not be rashly accepted," replied the other. "With gift, craft, promise, cause thy foe to yield. When these have failed thee, challenge him afield. To gain time for expedience is the first point. Expedients are good for great and little matters equally, like the subtle wash of waves that smoothly pass, but lay the tree as lowly as the grass. Let his Excellency the Parrot, then, be cajoled and contained here, while we place our fort in condition to be useful. Is it not said, 10 true bowmen on a rampart 50's onset may sustain? Fortalices keep a country more than an army's in the plain." "And your Majesty," continued the Goose, "will recall the points of a good fortress. Build it strong and build it spacious, with an entry and retreat. Store it well with wood and water. Fill its garners full with wheat." "Whom then shall we entrust with this work?" asked King Silver sides. "The Paddy bird is a good bird and a skillful," replied Minister. "Let him be summoned," said the King. And upon the entrance of the Paddy bird, the superintendence of the fortress was committed to him, and accepted with a low prostration. "As to the fort, sire," remarked the Paddy bird, It exists already in yonder large pool. The thing is to store the island in the middle of it with provisions. Gems will no man's life sustain. Best of gold is golden grain." "Good," said King Silver Sides, "let it be looked to." Thereupon, as the paddy bird was retiring, the usher entered again, and making prostration said, "May it please your Majesty, the King of all the Crows, Night Cloud by name, has just arrived from Singaldvipa, and desires to lay his homage at your Majesty's feet." "He is a wise bird, and a far travelled," said the King. "I think we must give him audience." "Nevertheless, sire," interrupted the Goose, "we must not forget that he is a land bird, and therefore not to be received as a waterfall. Your royal memory doubtless retains the story of the Jackal's fate, who, being coloured blue, leaving his party, left his own life too." "No, how was that?" asked King Silver Sides. The Goose related the story of the dyed Jackal. A Jackal, once on a time, as he was prowling about the suburbs of a town, slipped into an indigo tank, and not being able to get out, he laid himself down so as to be taken for dead. The dyer presently coming, and finding what seemed a dead Jackal, carried him into the jungle, and then flung him away. Left to himself, the Jackal found his natural colour changed to a splendid blue. "Really," he reflected, "I am now of a most magnificent tint. Why should I not make it conduce to my elevation?" With this view he assembled the other Jackals, and thus harangued them: "Good people, the Goddess of the Wood, with her own divine hand, and with every magical herb of the forest, has anointed me King. Behold the complexion of royalty, and henceforward transact nothing without my imperial permission." The Jackals, overcome by so distinguished a colour, could do nothing but prostrate themselves and promise obedience. His reign thus began, extended in time to the lions and tigers, and with these high born attendants he allowed himself to despise the Jackals, keeping his own kindred at a distance, as though ashamed of them. The Jackals were indignant, but an old beast of their number thus consoled them: "Leave the impudent fellow to me, I will contrive his ruin. These tigers and the rest think him a king, because he is coloured blue. We must show them his true colours. Do this now: in the evening time come close about him, and set up a great yell together. He is sure to join in as he used to do." Hard it is to conquer nature. If a dog were made a king, mid the coronation trumpets, he would gnaw his sandal string. And when he yells, the tigers will know him for a Jackal and fall upon him. The thing befell exactly so, and the Jackal," concluded the Minister, "met the fate of one who leaves his proper party." "Still," said the King, "the Crow has come a long way, and we might see him, I think." "Admit the Parrot first, sire," said the Goose. "The fort has been put in order, and the spy dispatched." Thereupon a court was called, and the Parrot introduced, followed by Night Cloud the Crow. A seat was offered to the Parrot, who took it, and with his beak in the air thus delivered his mission: "King Silver Sides, my master, the King Jewel Plume, Lord of Lords, bids thee, if life and lands be clear to thee, to come and make homage at his august feet, and failing this, to get thee gone from Camphor Island." "Shiva!" exclaimed the Raja, "is there none that will silence this traitor?" "Give the sign, your Majesty," said the Crow, starting up, "and I will dispatch this audacious bird." "Sir," said the Goose, "be calm, and Sire, deign to listen. It's no council where no sage is, it's no sage that fears not law, it's no law which truth confirms not, it's no truth which fear can awe. An ambassador must speak unthreatened, though base be the herald, nor injure nor let, for the mouth of a king is he. The sword may be whet, and the battle set, but the word of his message goes free." Thereat the Rajah and Night Cloud resumed their composure, and the Parrot took his departure, escorted by the Minister, and presented with complimentary gifts of gold and jewels. On reaching the palace of Jewel Plume, the King demanded his tidings, and inquired of the country he had visited. "War must be prepared, may it please you," said the Parrot. "The country is a country of paradise." "Prepare for war, then," said the King. "We must not enter on it in the face of destiny," interposed the Vulture Minister, whose title was Farsight. "Let the astrologer then discover a favourable conjuncture for the expedition, and let my forces be reviewed meantime," said the King. "We must not march without great circumspection," observed Farsight. "Minister," exclaimed the King, "you chafe me. Say, however, with what force we should set out." "It should be well selected, rather than unwieldy," replied the Vulture. "Better few and chosen fighters than of shaven crowns a host, for in the headlong flight confounded with the base the brave are lost. And its commanders must be judiciously appointed, for it is said, ever absent, harsh, unjustly portioning the captured prey. These, and cold or laggard leaders, make a host to melt away." "Ah!" interrupted the Rajah, "what need of so much talk? We will go, and if Vachaspati please, we will conquer." Shortly afterwards, Spy returned to Camphor Island. "King Silver sides," he cried, "the Rajah Jewel Plume is on his way hither, and has reached the Ghauts. Let the fort be manned, for that Vulture is a great minister, and I have learned too that there is one among us who is in his pay." "King," said the Goose, "that must be the Crow." "But whence then did he show such willingness to punish the Parrot?" objected his Majesty. "Besides, war has declared long after the Crow came to court." "I misdoubt him," said the Minister, "because he is a stranger." "But strangers surely may be well disposed," replied the King. "How say the books?" "Kind is kin, however a stranger; kin unkind is stranger shown. Sores hurt, though the body breeds them; drugs relieve, though desert grown." "Have you never heard of King Sudraka and the unknown servant, who gave his son's life for the King?" "Never," answered the Goose. The story of the faithful Rajput. I will tell you the tale said the king, as I heard it from Lily Flower, daughter of the flamingo white flag, of whom I was once very fond. A soldier presented himself one morning at King Sudraka's gate, and bade the porter procure an audience for Veera Vara, a Rajput, who sought employment. Being admitted to the presence, he thus addressed the king: "If your highness needs an attendant, behold one." "What pay do you ask?" inquired the king. 500 pieces of silver a day," said Veera Vara. "And your accouterments?" asked the king. "Are these 2 arms and the sabre, which serve for a third," said Vira, rolling up his sleeve. "I cannot entertain you," rejoined his majesty; and thereupon the Rajput made salam and withdrew. Then said the ministers, "If it please your majesty, the stipend is excessive, but give him pay for 4 days, and see wherein he may deserve it." Accordingly, the Rajput was recalled and received wages for 4 days, with the complimentary betel. Ah, the rare betel! Truly say the wise of it, "Betel nut is bitter, hot, sweet, spicy, binding, alkaline, a demulcent, an astringent, foe to evil's intestine, giving to the breath a fragrance, to the lips a crimson red, a detergent and a kindler of love's flame that lieth dead. Praise the gods for the good betel. These be 13 virtues given, hard to meet in one thing blended, even in their happy heaven." Now the king narrowly watched the spending of Veera Vara's pay, and discovered that he bestowed half in the service of the gods and the support of the Brahmans, a 4th part in relieving the poor, and reserved a 4th for his sustenance and recreation. This daily division made, he would take his stand with his sabre at the gate of the palace, retiring only upon receiving the royal permission. It was on the 14th night of the dark half of the month that King Sudraka heard below a sound of passionate sobbing. "Ho there!" he cried, "who waits at the gate?" "I," replied Veera Vara, "may it please you." "Go and learn what means this weeping," said the king. "I go, your majesty," answered the Rajput, and therewith departed. No sooner was he gone than the king repented him of sending one man alone into a night so dark that a bodkin might pierce a hole in it, and girdling on his scimitar, he followed his god beyond the city gates. When Veeravara had gone thus far, he encountered a beautiful and splendidly dressed lady who was weeping bitterly, and accosting her, he requested to know her name, and why she thus lamented. "I am the fortune of the King Sudraka," answered she. "A long while I have lived happily in the shadow of his arm, but on the 3rd day he will die, and I must depart, and therefore lament I." "Can nothing serve, divine lady, to prolong thy stay?" asked the Rajput. "It might be," replied the spirit, "if thou shouldest cut off the head of thy firstborn Shaktidhar, that hath on his body the 32 auspicious marks of greatness. Were his head offered to the all helpful Durga, the Raja should live 100 years, and I might tarry beside him." So speaking, she disappeared, and Viravara retraced his steps to his own house and awoke his wife and son. They arose and listened with attention until Viravara had repeated all the words of the vision. When he had finished, Shaktidhar exclaimed, "I am thrice happy to be able to save the state of the king. Kill me, my father, and linger not. To give my life in such a cause is good indeed." "Yes," said the mother, "it is good, and worthy of our blood. How else should we deserve the king's pay?" Being thus agreed, they repaired together at once to the temple of the goddess Durga, and having paid their devotions and entreated the favour of the deity on behalf of the king, Viravara struck off his son's head and laid it as an offering upon the shrine. That done, Viravara said, "My service to the king is accomplished, and life without my boy is but a burden." And therewith he plunged his sword in his own breast and fell dead. Overpowered with grief for her husband and child, the mother also withdrew the twice blooded weapon and slew herself with it on the bodies of Viravara and Shaktidhar. All this was heard and seen by King Sudraka, and he stood aghast at the sad sight. "Woe is me!" he exclaimed. "Kings may come and kings may go. What was I to bring these low? Hearts so noble pierced for me were not and will never be. What reck I of my realm, having lost these?" And thereat he drew his scimitar to take his own life also. At that moment there appeared to him the goddess, who is mistress of all men's fortunes. "Son," said she, staying his lifted hand, "forbear thy rash purpose, and bethink thee of thy kingdom." The Raja fell prostrate before her and cried, "O Goddess, I am done with life and wealth and kingdom. If thou hast compassion on me, let my death restore these faithful ones to life. Otherwise I follow the path they have marked." "Son," replied the Goddess, "thine affection is pleasing to me. Be it as thou wilt. The Rajput and his house shall be rendered alive to thee." Then the king departed, and presently saw Viravara return and take up again his station as before at the palace gate. "Ho there, Viravara!" cried the king, "what meant the weeping?" "Let your majesty rest well," answered the Rajput. "It was a woman who wept, and was comforted on my approach." This answer completed the Raja's astonishment and delight. For we know he is brave whose tongue is silent of the trophies of his sword. He is great whose quiet bearing marks his greatness well assured. So when the day was come, he called a full council, and declaring therein all the events of the night, he invested the faithful god with the sovereignty of the Carnatic. "Thus then," concluded King Silver sides, "in entertaining strangers a man may add to his friends." "It may well be," replied the Goose, "but a minister should advise what is expedient, and not what is pleasing in sentiment. When the priest, the leech, the vizier of a king his flatterers be, very soon the king will part with health and wealth and piety." "Let it pass then," said Silver sides, "and turn we to the matter in hand. King Jewel plume is even now pitched under the Ghauts. What think you?" "That we shall vanquish him," replied the Goose, "for he disregards, as I learn, the counsel of that great statesman, the Vulture Farsight, and the wise have said, "Merciless or money loving, deaf to counsel, false of faith, thoughtless, spiritless or careless, changing course with every breath, or the man who scorns his rival. If a prince should choose a foe, ripe for meeting and defeating, certes he would choose him so. He is marching without due preparation. Let us send the Paddy bird at the head of the force, and attack him on his march." Accordingly, the Paddy bird, setting out with a force of waterfowl, fell upon the host of the Peacock King and did immense execution. Disheartened thereat, King Jewel Plume summoned Farsight, his minister, and acknowledged to him his precipitation. "Wherefore do you abandon us, my father?" he said. "Correct for us what has been done amiss." "My liege," replied the Vulture, "it has been well observed. By the valorous and unskillful great achievements are not wrought. Courage, led by careful prudence, unto highest ends is brought. You have set strength in the seat of counsel, your Majesty, and he hath clumsily spoiled your plans. How indeed could it fall otherwise? For grief kills gladness, winter, summer, midnight gloom, the light of day. Kindness, ingratitude, and pleasant friends drive pain away. Each ends each, but none of other surer conquers can be Than impolicy of fortune, of misfortune policy. I have said to myself, my prince's understanding is affected. How else would he obscure the moonlight of policy with the night vapours of talk? In such a mood I cannot help him. Wisdom answers all who ask her, but a fool she cannot aid. Blind men in the faithful mirror see not their reflection made, and therefore I have been absent." "My father," said the King, joining his palms in respect, "mine is all the fault. Pardon it, and instruct me how to withdraw my army without further loss." Then the Vulture's anger melted, and he reflected, "Where the gods are, or thy Guru, in the face of pain and age, cattle, Brahmans, kings, and children reverently curb thy rage." And with a benignant smile he answered the King thus: "Be of good heart, my liege. Thou shalt not only bring the host back safely, but thou shalt first destroy the castle of King Silversides." "How can that be with my diminished forces?" asked the Rajah. "It will come to pass," answered the Vulture. "Break up today for the blockade of the fort." Now when this was reported by the spies to King Silversides, he was greatly alarmed. "Good Goose," said he, "what is to be done? Here is the King of the Peacocks at hand to blockade us, by his minister's advice too." "Sire," replied the Goose, "separate the efficient and the inefficient in your force, and stimulate the loyalty of the first with a loyal bounty of golden dresses, as each may seem to merit. Now is the time for it." "O my Prince, on 8 occasions prodigality is none. In the solemn sacrificing at the wedding of a son, when the glittering treasure given makes the proud invader bleed, or its lustre bringeth comfort to the people in their need, or when kinsmen are to succour, or a worthy work to end, or to do a mistress honour, or to welcome back a friend." "But is this expenditure needed?" said the King. "It is needed, my liege," said the Goose, "and it befits a monarch. For truth, munificence, and valour are the virtues of a king. Royalty devoid of either sinks to a rejected thing." "Let it be incurred then," replied the King. At this moment Night Cloud the Crow made his appearance. "Deign me one regard, sire," said he, "the insolent enemy is at our gates. Let your Majesty give the word, and I will go forth and show my valour and devotion to your crown." "It were better to keep our cover," said the Goose. "Wherefore else builded we this fortalice? Is it not said, 'Hold thy vantage; alligators on the land make none afraid, and the lion's but a jackal when he leaves his forest shade?' But go, your Majesty, and encourage our warriors." Thereupon they repaired to the gateway of the fort, and all day the battle raged there. It was the morning after when King Jewel Plume spake thus to his minister the Vulture: "Good sir, shall thy promise be kept to us?" "It shall be kept, your Majesty," replied the Vulture. "Storm the fort." "We will storm it," said the Peacock King. The sun was not well risen accordingly when the attack was made, and there arose hot fighting at all the four gates. It was then that the traitorous crows, headed by their monarch Night Cloud, put fire to every dwelling in the citadel, and raised a shout of "The fort is taken! It is taken!" At this terrible sound the soldiers of the Swan King forsook their posts and plunged into the pool. Not thus King Silver sides. Retiring coolly before the foe, with his general the Paddy Bird, he was cut off and encircled by the troopers of King Jewel Plume under the command of his Marshal the Cock. "My general," said the King, "thou shalt not perish for me. Fly, I can go no farther. Fly, I bid thee, and take counsel with the Goose, that Crest Jewel, my son, be named king." "Good, my lord," replied the Paddy Bird, "speak not thus. Let your Majesty reign victorious while the sun and moon endure. I am governor of your Majesty's fortress, and if the enemy enter it, he shall but do so over my body. Let me die for thee, my master." Gentle, generous, and discerning, such a prince the gods do give. "Thou shalt thou not," replied the Rajah. "Skillful, honest, and true hearted, where doth such a vassal live?" "Nay, my royal lord, escape!" cried the Paddy Bird. "A king's life is the life of his people. The people are the lotus leaves, their monarch is the sun. When he doth sink beneath the waves, they vanish every one. When he doth rise, they rise again, with bud and blossom rife, to bask a while in his warm smile, who is their lord and life. Think no more of me." At this instant the Cock, rushing forward, inflicted a wound with his sharp spurs on the person of the King. But the Paddy Bird sprang in front of him, and receiving on his body the blows designed for the Rajah, forced him away into the pool. Then turning upon the Cock, he dispatched him with a shower of blows from his long bill, and finally succumbed, fighting in the midst of his enemies. Thus the King of the Peacocks captured the fortress, and marched home with all the treasure in it, amid songs of victory. Then spake the Princess: "In that army of the Swans there was no soldier like the Paddy Bird, who gave his own life for the King's." "There be nowhere many such," replied Vishnu Sarman, "for all the cows bring forth our cattle. Only now and then is born an authentic lord of pastures. with his shoulder scratching horn. "It is well spoken," said the Princess. "But for him that dares to die so," added the Sage, "may an eternal heaven be reserved, and may the lustrous angels of paradise, the Apsaras, conduct him thither. Is it not so declared indeed? When the soldier in the battle lays his life down for his king, unto Swarga's perfect glory such a deed his soul shall bring." "It is so declared," said the Rajah's sons. "And now, my Princes," concluded Vishnu Sarman, "you have listened to war." "We have listened, and are gratified," replied the sons of the King. "Let me end then," said the Preceptor, "with this: If the clouds of battle lower when ye come into your power, Durga grant the foes that dare you bring no elephants to scare you, nor the thunderous rush of horses, nor the footmen's steel fringed forces, but overblown by policy's strong breath, hide thy in caverns from the avenging death." End of War, from the Book of Good Counsels, from the Sanskrit of Hithopadesha by Sir Edwin Arnold. Recording by Jyoti Taravanat.